In this video we'll be comparing my Jotul 602 and my Vermont Castings Aspen. Both of them were manufactured before the EPA changed the emissions in 2020. I will run both of these stoves in my Northwoods trapper cabin. We'll be looking at a bunch of data and graphs, and at the end of the video I will give you my conclusions based on that data. To make the comparison valid, I had to create two equal piles of firewood of equal mass and similar geometry, and I'll show you how I did this. So let's dive right into it. So I have 3 pieces of firewood that I'll be using for the comparison. I already labeled them 1, 2, and 3. Determined the center, and I'm going to cut these in half. And I'm going to weigh these to make sure we have the same mass of fuel in each stove. I cut these logs in half on my bandsaw, and they're exactly the same mass, each one of them. So here we go. What is that? 2 pounds. Here we go, 2 pounds. So I'm going to use these 3 pieces for the first and these for the second test. Let's see, something like that. Kindling, fire starter, and I'll do the same, the second pile. Kindling, fire starter. And there we go. Should be pretty fair comparison. The air intake on the Vermont Castings is on the rear, and the Vermont has a bimetal spring and a lever that is connected with a chain to the flap. And during the operation of this experiment, I made sure that the flaps remained completely open so that there's no restriction of airflow for the experiment. Yeah, so this time for the comparison, I'm going to set up the firewood in the middle of the firebox rather than pushing it all the way back. I'll do the same on the Jotul 602. So one of the things you have to do on these Northwoods cabins, since they are so well made and they are completely airtight, you have to crack a window open, otherwise your fire really doesn't burn at all. And I made a little spacer here. So this is going to be my gauge. So for both comparisons, or for both burn tests, I'm going to have the same gap in the window so fresh air can get in to keep the fire going. Outside temperature is 68 Fahrenheit. I do have a thermometer built in here. It's showing me currently 64. I will be using my digital thermometer. 64, 65, so that's pretty good. So temperature readings for this comparison will be done right here on both stoves at about 4 inches with my IR thermometer. Baseline is 61, 61.8, call it 62. And also I want to do it on the side, and I'm going to use the center of the panel. And of course it's going to be the same temp. Yeah, 61.3. The reason is the Vermont Castings has fire brick and the Jotul doesn't. So this is going to heat up a lot slower, but it'll retain the heat a lot longer. So I just want to get both data points. And temperature readings will be taken every 15 minutes. And I'm going to close the door, but don't latch it, to generate some draft. 30 minutes into it, this thing burns pretty well. Pretty impressive. Let's see what we have here. 194, 194, pretty good. 124, 124. So 45 minutes into it. I just checked the back. The air vent is still wide open. Let's see what we have. 203, 204, 204, 150, 150. Okay, 1 hour into it. Let me see if the air flap is all the way open. Let me see if you can see. Yep, all the way open. So here we go. Top. 197, 199. Let's call this 199. Side. 160. So an hour and 15 minutes into it. Let's see what we're getting over here. 188. 162, 162. So 90 minutes into it. Let's see what we're getting. Data, 185, 185, 185. 165, 163, 167, 165. So an hour and 45 into this. Let's see what the temperature readings are. 183, 168, 168. So let me pause right here. So at this point the data looks pretty boring, and I was actually pretty disappointed. But just keep watching, it's gonna get a whole lot more interesting here in a second. Okay, we're 2 hours in. Let's take the last temperature reading. Some pretty good flames going. Let's see what we're getting. Oh wow, 250, 250. That's pretty good. 184, 181, 187. Call it 184. Well, the data has changed so much, 2 hours, 15 minutes into it. I gotta take another reading. So let's see what we have. $265, 219. Okay, 2.5 hours into it, man. This is gonna be my last reading. I mean, come on, guys. Let's see what we are getting. It feels pretty hot. 267, 267. 234, 234, 267, 234. Yeah, old stove out. Yeah, Jotul 602 going in. Window is cracked open. Second test, Jotul 602. Okay, we're gonna leave the door open for about 5 minutes to generate some draft. Cabin temperature currently is 70 degrees Fahrenheit. You have 15 minutes in, and just listen to this thing. It has pretty good draft going. So let's see what the temperatures are up here. 122. 141. 30 minutes into it. 250, 268, 268. 268. 268. 45 minutes into it. This thing is burning very well. It's putting out a lot of heat. 387, 410, 410. So 1 hour into it, it's burning nicely. Let's see what we get. 425, 430, 430. Let's call this 430. 467, 467. 1 hour and 15 minutes in. Man, this thing burned fast. Let's see what we get. 421, 427, 426. Let's call it 426. 487, 488. So we are an hour and a half into the test. The stove is burning very well. Let's see what we are getting here. 375, 395, 395, 462. Yeah, an hour and 45 minutes into it. Lots of coals in the stove. 339, 342, 342, let's call it 340. The side, 406, 406. Okay, 2 hours into it. It's mainly coals right now, so the wood has been largely consumed, which is a good thing. 310, 306, 306. Let's call it 306. 355, 355. 2 hours and 15 minutes into it. Just coals left. Let's see what we get. 280, 280, 323, 323. 2.5 hours into this comparison, this is going to be my final measurement. The fire is pretty much out, it's just coals in there, which is great. Let me see what we are getting here. 247, 247, 284, 284. Let's look at the data in a little more detail here. So I added some data labels so that we can have a little better discussions about this. Vermont Castings are those red lines and the Jotul 602 are the green lines. On the horizontal axis you have the time in minutes and on the vertical axis you have the temperature in Fahrenheit. The operating conditions were exactly the same for both stoves. We use the exact same firewood, the same mass. We use the same cabin. We use the same 6-inch exhaust pipe. And both stoves were completely cleaned before the tests. The vents on both stoves were completely open. And the Vermont Castings did not throttle back the air intake. From the data we can see that the Jotul consumed the firewood a lot faster, and at around the 1 hour mark it actually reached twice the temperature of the Vermont Castings. Interesting to see here is that the Vermont Castings increased the temperature at about 1 hour and 45 minutes when the data started to taper down, and all of a sudden we had a good fire going in the Vermont Castings and the temperature jumped up. The Jotul ran very hot right from the get-go and consumed a lot of firewood really quickly. The Jotul started to run out of firewood right at the 90-minute mark. You can see how the temperature went down from like 426 down to 400, 340. So that's when the firewood was mostly consumed and we were left with coals in the firebox. The Jotul has a lot less thermal mass compared to the Vermont Castings, but I don't believe that is the primary reason why the difference in temperature was seen here. Yeah, one can speculate, but my hypothesis is that the location of the air intake is the primary reason for the temperature differences here. The Vermont Castings has the air intake in the back, and the majority of the air comes in from underneath the firebox. There's a grate in there. Where the Jotul 602 has the air intake in the front door, and it creates a lot of draft, and it really fuels the fire and gets it going really hot really quickly. I kept track of the inside cabin temperature as well, and you can see the red line is when I tested the Vermont Castings, and I started out at 65 Fahrenheit. And when I did the Jotul test, the cabin was a little bit warmer at 70. And you look at those lines and you say like, yeah, okay, the Jotul, heats up the cabin a little bit faster and, it's not that big of a difference. But if I normalize this data and we are looking at the delta T, the temperature difference, by time, you can see the yellow line, the Jotul 602 really does a fantastic job in heating up the cabin a lot faster than the Vermont Castings does. In closing, I want to show you these graphs side by side, and on the left hand side you have the stove temperature, on the right hand side you have the delta T, the increase in cabin temperature on the inside, and the data clearly shows that there's a direct correlation to the stove temperature and the increase of air temperature inside the cabin. I would love to hear your comments. Maybe we can have some interesting discussions here. So see you on the next one.